think we're at the cool kids table. Right. It's funny you said the thing about changing his birthday. When my baby brother was born, my mother. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Patty Mclaughlin. I'm the interim city manager. We're going to have introductions for the rest of the commission in just a few minutes. But we're meeting today to decide to come to some agreement about what we want to do with an RFP if possible. We're going to look at funding. We're going to look at ownership of homes versus rental and some other directions that we want to go in. You'll be a big part of that today. Hopefully we'll walk out of here today with some clear direction on where we want to do for the commission and BVRAC. Welcome Mayor Cherry Johnston, Commissioner Clayton Lopez, Commissioner Mary Lou Hoover, second time in a while, Commissioner Billy Wardlow, Commissioner Gregory Davila, who am I missing? Commissioner Jimmy Weekly, and Commissioner Sam Kaufman. So thank you all for being here, and our directors and our community members. This is extremely important for all of us today. And I'm going to introduce Alicia Levy, who's working with us on so many different areas, and strategic planning is one of them, which is a very important part of strategic planning is the affordable work.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Elisa Levy, and I am the strategic planning consultant for the city of Key West. And the reason I'm up here today is because In January 2021, we did a survey to see what the community cared about most. 3,667 people responded to that survey. The number one need, affordable housing. So we are very grateful that you're all here today, that so many people care about this. It's become a priority for the strategic plan. And of course, the 3.2 acres is central to this discussion. So we're looking forward to making some progress today. And I have to tell you, we have a fantastic panel. We couldn't have been more lucky to have the people we have here today. So I'm gonna, as we go through, before each presentation, I'll tell you a little bit about each of them. But just for now, so you understand, we're talking about three things today that are gonna help us move forward with our decisions on the 3.2 acres. And that is funding and finance. And we have Miss Debbie Blinderman. Debbie, if you would just put your hand up so we know who you are. She is amazing and has helped our community very much in the past. So I'll tell you more about her in a moment. The second issue we're going to be talking about is something that's very important to this 3.2 acres, to BVRAC, to our community in general, home ownership. And we have two speakers on that today. One is Miss Terry Hill, who again, I'll tell you more about later. Some of you know, and she is with Habitat for Humanity. And we have a speaker from New York, an expert on housing and home ownership, who will be zooming in to share a home ownership model with us as well. And her name is Dina Levy. And then finally, we have, probably you know, someone who's gonna talk about the vision. What do we wanna see as we move forward? And we've had this discussion before, but we have new ways of thinking about it. What do we, if we're starting again with the RFP, what could this be? And it's a great discussion. And our own Katie Halloran, who is the Director of Planning here at the City of Key West, will be sharing some ideas with us on that, as will Dina Levy, because she has been speaking to community members about this. Okay, so we have a great setup for today. Just a few logistical points before we begin. First of all, if everyone has a cell phone, would you please just make sure that your ringer is off? Bathrooms for any of our guests here today are right outside to your right. There's also a water station to refill your water bottle if you need it, a water fountain. Okay. Copies of the presentations. You will see two presentations today, two PowerPoints. We will be sending you, if you signed in your email, we will be sending you those PowerPoint presentations after the meeting. However, if you'd really like a hard copy, we also have some hard copies up here. Feel free to come and take one, okay? Finally, we're gonna ask that you hold all of your questions until after each panelist has finished. So if you don't have a piece of paper and a pen to write down your questions as we go, there's extra paper and pens up here. Please come help yourself so you can write your thoughts and questions, and we will do that after they have finished. Does that sound good? Okay, great. Then let me begin by giving the floor to Miss Blinderman, Miss Debbie Blinderman. Debbie is an affordable housing financial consultant. She worked for the Florida Housing Finance Corporation, FHFC. She is the person we need. And she is passionate and dedicated for the last 20 years to affordable, sustainable housing. She knows Florida and she knows our community. We are all familiar with Marty's Place, Point Siena Gardens, and the Garden View Apartments. Debbie helped us with that. So she is a fantastic person to guide us today. She's going to talk to us a little bit about funding opportunities, give us some ideas, and again, great person to write some questions down. She came all the way from Tallahassee just to do this for us today. So with that, I'm going to give the floor to Ms. Blinderman. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Boy, you can't tell, but I'm very much blushing right here and going, no. No, I'm very, very happy to be here today. Affordable housing is a passion of mine, been in it for a long time, and I know how important it is to all of you here, the city, and the citizens here of Key West. I'll jump right into it. As I was thinking about when I was coming down, what I think is some good funding sources for the city of Key West is Florida Housing Finance Corporation, which you probably all are familiar with, and then also the Federal Home Loan Bank. So those are two sources that I think you could tap into to help provide financing for affordable housing here. One of the things I wanted to say, because I know you have some areas for redevelopment, is that we have assisted, just as an aside, my son is my business partner, and so when I say we, it's me and my son. We're both consultants. But in any event, we have assisted other communities with revitalization and redevelopment projects as far as looking for the financing for the rental housing. So one of the things that we have always found to be super successful in those environments is to include the community, let them have their input, and because they're going to be affected by the area that's going to be built, or if you are doing a revitalization that requires demolition, then it's so important for everyone to be on board. Also, as you probably know, a lot of the regulatory agreements with HUD, with Florida Housing, you have to have relocation plans. So if there's concern that, well, if we are looking to redevelop this area, what's going to happen to the citizens that are living there, the tenant base? Well, you have to file a very good detailed tenant relocation plan before you can even get your funding. So there's a lot of venues other than yourselves protecting that tenant base to be sure that your citizens are taken care of. So on to financing. So Florida Housing rolls out, I call it rolling out, requests for applications throughout the year. First part of the year, they typically roll out what we call like one-off RFAs. It could be disabling conditions. It could be special needs. It could be homeless. Those RFAs, the pot's not as big, but then you don't have as many people seeking those funds. The other type of financing that Florida Housing rolls out is highly competitive financing of 9% credits or SAIL, which stands for State Apartment Incentive Loan Program, get that right, SAIL funds with tax-exempt bonds and 4% credits. So those are financing tools that many developers in the state of Florida go seek, and it's highly, highly competitive. One thing that I think is important for everyone to realize is that sometimes you put in an application, it's 100% perfect, there's nothing wrong with it, but you didn't win. And again, I speak about that competitiveness. You could have been competing for this little pot and it was 10 to 1, 10 perfect ones and one got funded. So it takes some time, and don't be discouraged if you apply, you don't get funded, reapply the next round. Just keep at it. Every now and then you apply for your first time and you win, and then you really celebrate. So that's one of the things I did want to mention. Let me see, excuse me. I'm not the best at being on the spotlight here. One of the things I think a lot of you probably in the room are familiar with is that Florida Housing has a site control requirement. And if you have a lease, which I believe the city has quite a bit of property that they would be interested in possibly leasing for affordable housing, Florida Housing has a requirement for 55 years for that lease. The other day, I called and spoke to someone at Florida Housing and said, if a municipality has to get a referendum in order to have a longer lease, is there any way we could get relief? Is there any way we can talk to you guys and maybe put some language in there that, but for failure to provide affordable housing, not doing your job, that you would have an auto renewal of some sort? Then we wouldn't have, cities would not have to have a referendum. Not all cities have to go through a referendum like you guys are dealing with. So just wanted you to know they're very open to public interaction, and I would highly recommend somebody from the city calling and just talking to them about it. And I can help facilitate that call if you like, but it really is something I just wanted to mention. Excuse me. With regard to the various requests for applications, right now there's an RFA on the street. It's due April 23rd. It's sale and housing credit financing for the construction of workforce housing. It's only good in 3 counties, Monroe, Miami-Dade, and Broward. Now, that closes, so we would not, you would not be able to participate, obviously, right now. But Monroe County has a legislative priority, and as such, this funding is going to be available year to year. So, you know, if you missed it this year, but there's other opportunities. There, and I made a list of a lot of the different RFAs that have affected Monroe County. One of them was post-hurricane, and it's, they call it CDBG-DR, which stands for Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery. So those are all RFAs that have come out specific to Monroe County. And of course, I think one that was in 2020, there were 3 developments awarded in that one. Last year's, just so you know, last year's workforce housing for sale that I mentioned is open right now. No one in Monroe County applied. So, you know, again, these opportunities are there. We just have to be creative on how to come up with the right application, the right funding mix to make them happen. Another one that occurred was in 2020, and excuse me, these are 9%, which is the most competitive source of funding that people go after. It's strictly like an infusion of equity into your deal. That, people, we call them geographic RFAs. Well, the one that went out for medium and small counties last year, no one in Monroe County applied. And Monroe's considered a small county by RFA, Florida Housing Measures. So, you know, again, an opportunity, and Joe and I in our business, we recommend that everybody, you apply for everything. You know, take as many bites of the apple as you can, and maybe one will hit. So, and then 2019, same thing, 9% application. There weren't any from Monroe County. One of the 2019 hurricane recoveries was 3 were funded. And then in 2019, the CDBG, Garden View, and another one was funded. Let's see, Marty's Place was funded in 2018, and of course now is built and fully occupied and beautiful. So that's just, I know I threw a lot out there, but I just wanted you to know there's been a lot of RFAs in the past that could be tapped into to provide the financing for the housing you need. Florida Housing right now anticipates to start having workshops and draft RFAs out, I think in August, and hopefully start opening for the geographic RFAs in September. Now, something that often slows down the timeline is if we have hurricanes, and then they push everything back. We also are waiting for session to be over and see how much sale money we're going to have. Another thing, excuse me, can I take a sip? I'm not sick, but I've got pollen problems. Excuse me. Florida Housing is going to put a new timeline up by the end of the month, and hopefully that timeline will show you some dates when these various RFAs will be out on the street, when they're due, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing I wanted to mention is that Florida Housing has on its website they call it Local Government 101, and they put it out there for local governments. And so I encourage you to tap into that. And in June, they're going to put out another one. So they'll be updating it. If you hear something there, it may not be current because they're going to update it here shortly. Let's see. Now, as far as new funding from the infrastructure package and the CARES Act, when I talk to Florida Housing, you know, right now we don't know how much Florida's going to get, what all they're going to earmark it for, you know, for what certain things. Don't know if Florida Housing's going to be the allocating agency, or will it be Florida Housing, local jurisdictions, or even the state. So we're just waiting to hear about that. But I know that you have interest in homelessness, and so one of the things that's in that bill is I think it's home funds. They're going to be, and that will go through Florida Housing, and there'll be a good amount of money to help with homelessness. So that's something to consider, and, you know, we can watch for as these things unfold. Let's see, and I think that's pretty much all I had. I did realize that I didn't put in my notes, I mentioned the Federal Home Loan Bank. Federal Home Loan Bank is all over the country, and they have an affordable housing program. So a lot of developments in Florida apply to Atlanta Federal Home Loan Bank, but you can apply to any of them in the country, and some of them have limits of $500,000 a development, and some of them have up to $1 million or $2 million per development. So it's another tool to follow Federal Home Loan Bank and see what they may have available for you to tap into. And that concludes my presentation, and I know you'll have questions later, but.
Okay, thank you very much, Debbie.
Sure.
So just to reiterate Debbie's point, I guess we've left a lot of money on the table. And the good news is we can, what did you say, take as many bites of apples as we can. And as we know, there's some big apples coming down through the federal government right now. So we'll have a chance to ask Debbie for some advice and some ideas in the Q&A. And thank you. As we all know, one of the key issues that we've been considering and very interested in is home ownership. But how do you do it? How do you do it in such a tight market and with really little funding? And so we want to offer Ms. Terry Hill an opportunity to talk to us a little bit about what Habitat for Humanity has done already. They have had successes in the Keys, and she's going to tell us a little bit about that. Before that, though, let me tell you who she is. So if you don't know Ms. Hill, she is a pastor at United Methodist Church here in Key West, and very beloved. And she is also the chairperson for Habitat for Humanity for the last 6 years, but her work on housing has been going on for the last 40 years. She's been working with different Habitat affiliates in other cities, and she comes to us with a great deal of knowledge and, just like Debbie, a great deal of passion. So I'm going to give the floor to her and have her tell us a little bit about Habitat's approach, hopefully something that we'll be able to tap into. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I find that most people know the name Habitat for Humanity. It's a very widely recognized name, but not as many people know kind of how Habitat works. And I think of it in my mind very much like an old-fashioned barn raising. If you've ever watched one of those movies where the whole community comes together to raise a barn, that's sort of the way that Habitat for Humanity works. The partner families own their homes. So they apply for a Habitat home, and in order to qualify for a Habitat home, there are 3 criteria. One of those is need. So they need to be in a housing situation that's inadequate. And that's number 1 criteria. Number 2 is they have an ability to pay. So we income qualify people for our mortgages, and they need to be at a certain point financially. So they have a stable income, they have fairly low debt, and they have the ability to pay a mortgage. But they also have to be under a certain income level and be in that sweet spot. So all of our mortgages are for 80% AMI. I know lots of other folks build at higher AMIs than that, but Habitat focuses on the 80% AMI. So they have to have an ability to pay. And thirdly, they need to have a willingness to partner. So what that means is that they will come to classes. We have home ownership classes. They come, they learn about maintenance, about setting a budget, about warranties, about insurance, about all those things that everybody who owns a home needs to know. So we set them up to succeed. And they also agree to 300 hours of sweat equity. And we're kind of famous for our sweat equity. And what that means is that the family is going to put 300 hours, volunteer hours, into Habitat. And one of the joys of my life is a volunteer Saturday when the board and volunteers, and often we have volunteers from the Coast Guard and people from businesses that have a team building day, and right alongside the families that are going to live in those homes. We're all there painting and carrying lumber back and forth and putting up lattice work and doing the kinds of things that volunteers can do. So when you think about the cost of a home, and how is it that Habitat can do it so much less than other people can do it? Well, for one, we're a nonprofit, so we're not trying to make a profit, so that's one big thing. But then we do as much as we can with volunteer labor. Of course, things like electrical work and plumbing and all that, that's all done by licensed contractors. It's all inspected and everything's done very well. But those things that can be done by volunteers, we do by volunteers. So if you just multiply in your mind 300 hours of labor times whatever labor cost you want to put in there, you can see there's a significant amount of savings that happens for Habitat homes because of the sweat equity. So our partner families, once that we have a selection criteria that is non-discriminatory, that goes by these criteria about need and ability to pay and willingness to partner. And then once out of all the pool of applicants, the highest scoring folks get chosen for a Habitat home, then they start participating with the sweat equity and with the classes, and then they move towards their mortgage. So all of our Habitat homes are owned by the families. So it's a true home ownership program. And for those of you that study the differences about what happens in a family, even what happens in the life of a child when they live in a home ownership place versus a rental. I mean, they have higher grades in school. The suicide rate is lower. There's a lot of impact to the life of a family when they own a home as opposed to renting. So the families pay a mortgage, they pay insurance, they pay taxes, and our funding in order to build these, build the houses, and I'll tell you a tiny bit about that as well, but just a little bit about our funding, which is pretty complicated. I'm not a banker or a mortgage person, so to me, it's pretty complicated. I'll do my best to answer questions as I can. But one source of our funding is CCTCP, which is a community tax program where local businesses, so a big shout out to Manly DeBoer and Hemingway Home and HTA and a whole lot of other wonderful businesses here in town that fill out an application with the state, and the sales tax that they paid into the state can come back for affordable housing in our own community. So those wonderful folks have gone through that program with us and really helped, and there's others as well, have really helped us qualify for those funds that are significant. The Land Authority has given us grants. Mostly all of our property, as far as I know, we didn't pay for any of our property. All of the property came either from the Land Authority or from another donor. We get a lot of grants. Habitat International is wonderful about giving grants, Publix Charities. I have a whole list, so if y'all are interested in that, I can tell you some of our other granting sources, wonderful recipients of grants. Lots of donations, local businesses, individuals, churches, lots of donations. We have fundraiser events. We just had one 2 Saturdays ago, very successful, raised $24,000. And so we have continual events which help us. Mortgages. So when we sell a Habitat house, and we have a mortgage with the family, all the paperwork and closing and all that sort of thing, there is some regulation, which I don't fully understand, but somebody here probably does, in the banking world, where the banks are required to do good in their own communities, and most of those are directed towards affordable housing. So the banks get credit when they buy mortgages, and we are able to sell mortgages at par, which instead of getting our mortgages are 0% interest for 30 years, which is a big part of what makes owning a home affordable. And so we have some banks that we partner with that buy our mortgages at par, and that gives us a serious infusion of cash that allows us to build ever more homes. We have rentals here in the Keys. We have 28 residential units and 2 commercial units, and so we get rental income from those. Likewise, those are 80% AMI affordable rentals, one on Stock Island and one here on Key West. We have a restore that we used to have a building restore. Now we have a warehouse and a way of passing on furniture and other goods, and so we make money on our restore sales. There are wonderful companies that give us materials, and if you've been in the lumber department lately, you know that materials are extraordinarily expensive. And so we have some partners, DeWalt, GE gives us appliances, Scotty's, other companies that we get free materials. And of course the sweat equity is worth a lot. So we were founded here in the Lower Keys in 1993, and we've constructed 49 homes so far. Just to give you an idea of prices, the first homes that we built up on Big Pine, a 3-bedroom home was $160,000. The last ones were in a 16 home project up on Cudjoe, and we've already closed on 4 of those, and a 3-bedroom was $302,750. So obviously the prices have definitely increased. One thing that's a little different about Habitat as well is that we are required to sell our houses at the market value. There was concern, I would say, from homeowners that lived in neighborhoods with Habitat houses that when we sold them for the amount of the mortgage that we were going to receive back, that it would drive down the prices in that community, because when you did a market study in your neighborhood, one of the houses in your neighborhood would be much less expensive. So we're required to sell them at the market rate. But what we do with that is we figure out the 80% AMI over 30 years, and that's the first mortgage. And then we have a silent second mortgage, which at the end of that mortgage period is generally forgiven. So that allows us to sell our Habitat houses at the market value, but still make them affordable for the people that purchase them. So that's a little bit about, I know we'll have a Q&A time, and so I'm looking forward to that, to answering whatever questions you might have about Habitat for Humanity.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Terry. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, and so one of the things that we are going, when we break into groups later and talking about what we want this property to look like and more vision, is this a model we want to tap into for home ownership? And they've already had proven success here, right? So something that we should be considering. But we don't only have local models. We have models from elsewhere. And I keep saying when we're talking about the strategic plan to everybody, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can look at other cities and other municipalities across the nation and beyond at what they're doing on everything, including home ownership. And so our next speaker is actually a housing, I'll call her a housing guru from New York. And she was kind enough to zoom in today. And so let me introduce, and you can see her on the screen. Her name is Dina Levy, and she is the Senior Vice President of Single Family Housing and Community Development for the state of New York. Prior to that, she was working on housing for the state attorney for the Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman of New York. And prior to that, she's done everything you could imagine in housing, from grassroots organizing in Texas and New York, all the way up to running nonprofits. And so she has the base grassroots, and she has the state level experience. And I should also just say she's won numerous awards for her work on affordable housing, including 40 under 40 for New York City, Crain's magazine, for the 40 most influential people under 40 years old in New York for her work on affordable housing. So I think she could come to us with a lot of guidance. She's going to talk about two things today. The first is home ownership. I'll give her the floor now. And then also, after Katie, she'll speak a little bit about some advice she has for us on the 3.2 acres. So Dina, thank you very much for being here. Can you hear us?
Sure can.
Okay. Can everybody hear Dina okay? Say something, Dina.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Coming through? Are we okay? Lee, on volume?
Yeah, you sound good, Dina.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Elisa, can you just confirm that you can hear me because you're going to be running the slides?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good, great. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Elisa, for having me. It's really a great pleasure to be here and to talk about affordable homeownership and just affordable housing in general. I want to go through pretty quickly a model that we created for what I'll call collective homeownership, which can be either structured as a condo or a co-op. We did this very intentionally in New York, both starting in New York City and then expanding out to other more rural and suburban places across the state of New York, with a lens towards how do you balance creating affordable housing that survives generationally, so meaning the affordability stays true year after year, but also recognizing that there's a real need to address some of the inequities in affordable housing historically, and that many communities across the country have not been given equal access to the benefits of affordable homeownership and the equity building that enables. And frankly, in New York, we're thinking about that very much through the lens of communities of color who have been unfairly treated disparately, both by lending institutions and frankly by federal housing policy. So this model seeks to really balance equity building with long-term affordability. So let's go to the first slide. I want to just say a quick word about why why you might want to consider a condo or a co-op as opposed to, say, individual single-family homes. Though we are big fans of Habitat and love what they do, and it's a great model. There are also some benefits to thinking about collective homeownership in the form of a condo or a co-op. One is there is a way to really bring down expenses through the sharing of the professional services that you need to operate the property. So, that could be an external management company. It could be amenities that you want to bring in to the facility. So if you want a playground for the children, right? These are all sort of shared community resources that all the members of the co-op or the condo are contributing towards. It also helps potentially, and I don't know as much about your taxing authority here, but could potentially bring down your operating expenses through reduction in property taxes. It also allows potentially to include a greater number of units in a smaller land footprint. So if your goal on, let's say, the 3.2 acres is to expand the number of homeownership units, instead of building out in a co-op or condo model, you could also build up, thereby increasing the number of units that you can sort of do with one project and one source of financing. And then lastly, and I think this is true in many different types of affordable housing models, but it does foster a sense of community. We found in New York City, when I worked for a nonprofit that did nothing but co-ops, if one family started to struggle, others usually gathered round and provided support. So it's really sort of almost like a fail-safe for particularly when folks are getting into homeownership for the first time. There's a real benefit to having a collective sense of, we sink or we swim together. So let's go to the next slide. So a couple things to just consider, going back to this notion of what are the sort of pros and cons and the trade-offs. The first is really, who are you trying to serve, right? And so this is a question of what depth of affordability do you want to get to, or to what income band are you trying to serve? We heard Habitat talk about, their focus is on people below 80. I think obviously that is a very critical universe of people, but it's also hard to find housing if you're at 90% of AMI or even 100% of AMI, and in Key West, probably those numbers keep going up. The thing to consider is the deeper you want to go in terms of affordability, typically the more subsidy you need, either in the construction phase or in the operating phase, but nonetheless, the deeper affordability usually requires more subsidy. And that's not to say you can't achieve that, just something to consider when you're thinking about what income bands you want to serve. The next sort of area to think about push and pull or trade-offs is this notion of allowing folks to build equity and to take advantage of the quote unquote American dream of homeownership, while at the same time recognizing that the more equity you're allowed to build, it means the less affordable the home is on resale or in future generations. And I think the model we're going to talk about today really tries hard to find the right balance between those two issues. So how do you allow families, particularly those who've been excluded historically, in getting access to home ownership? How do you allow them to build well while still making sure that future generations can buy that housing when the homeowner's ready to sell at a rate that's still affordable? And then the last thing I would suggest is that you think about when you're creating your model for this, should you choose to do that, is, there are some real benefits to having varied incomes living in the same community or even the same complex. So, there's some, in New York City, there's been some models where some people who are getting an insider price and buying their units at affordable to 60% of area median income. And then on the other side, there's going all the way up to market. So people are making 250% of area median income. You can have that all in one physical structure. And sometimes people think of that as really positive because you have a different variety of families and experiences living in the same place. And I think there's truth in that. I think on the other side, though, we have also seen sometimes when you have really wild variances in terms of income bands living in the same property, you sometimes find that leads, unfortunately, to like faction wars. So I don't know if any of you heard about, like, in New York, they called it the poor door, but there was this really awful situation in which, the wealthier people didn't want to come in the same door as the lower income people. And it was just a really depressing and unpleasant experience. And so sometimes you have to consider, if you're going to be serving wildly variant incomes, how to make sure all amenities are available to everybody and that you don't run into that type of, classist attitude. Let's go to the next slide and get really into sort of the details. So I'm going to give you a model that, again, we created for New York, but I've amended it to make it more reflective of what the actual numbers are here in Key West. So the example that we're going to talk through, and again, you could structure this a number of different ways, but just to give everybody a sort of run through of an actual project. I'd like you to imagine a 50-unit building. So again, this would be probably a multifamily construct, meaning you build up, not just out. Based on my conversations with some folks locally, your development costs are roughly, and this probably could be a little low because of what we heard about labor and material costs, but say roughly the total cost to build the 50 units is $20 million. That's $400,000 a unit, which is not very different than New York City's costs, and I think so Key West is high. And we would structure it as a mix of 1 and 2 and 3 bedrooms so that you could, serve different family types. The thinking behind this model that we're going to run through is that it would serve a band of incomes, but at a sort of narrow range. So the bottom affordability would be 90% of area median income. That means people would have to earn at least 90% of AMI to be able to afford their unit. But you would put a cap and wouldn't make these units available to people who earn greater than 110%. So that's the band of incomes that you'd be serving. And that allows for basically a mix of incomes so that people would be paying somewhere between 25% or 30% of their monthly income to own one of these units. So let's go to the next slide. So again, the considerations here are, it's pretty much considered all affordable, but with this range of 90 to 110%. The goal is to allow for moderate wealth building for the residents, both in the first and in future generations. And that has to be accomplished through some type of regulatory agreement. So in this case, if the city were transferring land to a developer and the developer were then selling the units to the residents who are going to ultimately become the co-op or the condo members, either the developer or the city would have to impose a long-term regulatory agreement and monitor it in order to ensure that future generations are within the income bands that you're intending to serve. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I think for the purposes of just running through the economics of this, I would ask you to look at the 2-bedroom, 2-bath column. So that's, relatively speaking, a 3-person household. So in this scenario, we would assume a purchase price for that unit of about $325,000. That's not super, super cheap, but I think compared to other 2-bedroom, 2-baths in the Keys, it does get to a more affordable rate than what market would allow. We then calculate the monthly cost of that from a homeowner perspective, and you'll notice the asterisk. So it assumes that the person moving into this unit is going to take out a mortgage for 97% of that $325,000. So they're going to get a loan from a lender. They're going to have a mortgage payment. And then, of course, to live in a co-op or condo, as we talked about earlier, there are the monthly fees or the HOA fees that you pay just to keep the services running and the amenities going. And I assumed here, which is, again, probably a reasonable estimation of $700 per month. So with the mortgage payment and the $700 a month in maintenance, that person would be paying monthly about $2,115 to live in this 2-bedroom, 2-bath. That would be serving an income at 90% of AMI, such that the 2115 represents 31% of their monthly income. And so that's how we think about affordability. And you can see it works across the 3 columns. So the 1-bedroom, 1-baths are a little cheaper. The mortgage is going to be less. The 3-bedroom, 2-bath is going to be a little bit more expensive. Mortgage is going to be a little bit higher. But in all cases, it works up and down to serve people who are earning a minimum of 90% of the area median income. Next slide. So then how do we think about equity building and the resale and the long-term affordability? So this model looked historically at how much an AMI has gone up year over year. I think we looked back 15 years. And I think we determined that typically looking historically, and therefore what we could extrapolate going forward, is that the AMI probably increases about 2.5% a year. Obviously, things like COVID and the foreclosure crisis, so major events putting aside, the average historical number is about 2.5% a year. So it means 10 years from now, somebody will be making right at 2.5% more. So 90% will look a little different 10 years from now than it looks today. And so we tagged the resale price for all of these units based on that 2.5%. What that basically says is for every year the resident lives in the co-op or condo, every year that they live there, they can think about a resale of that home at a 2.5% increase from what they paid. So this example imagines that the first generation buyer is selling 10 years after purchasing the unit. That means in the 2-bed, 2-bath column in the middle, they had originally paid $325,000 for that unit. It's now 10 years later, based on the 2.5% index, they could sell that unit for $416,000. Remember, it's 10 years later. Their total profit earned based on both the increase in sale price and the equity they built by paying down their mortgage over 10 years allows them to walk away with basically an earned profit of $164,000. So over 10 years, that's basically what the first generation homeowners in the 2-bed, 2-bath model would gain on sale if they sold at 10 years. So if you go to the next slide, I'm sorry, Lee, go back. I want to finish a point there. The goal here that's really critical is in the next sale price, right? So basically that 416,000, because we assume that incomes have gone up by 2.5% a year, it means that 10 years from now, when somebody's buying that unit for 416,000, it's still affordable to somebody at 90% of the area median income, right? It's just 10 years later, so that income is a little bit higher. And so what this hopefully does is find a very fair balance between building equity, particularly for people who have been denied that historically, while keeping affordability. And you can just keep doing this over and over, 10 more years, 10 more years, 10 more years. And as long as your regulatory agreement remains in place, that is sort of the model by which you keep this housing affordable for as long as the city deems critical. So now let's go to the last page. So this is the last slide, and it sort of gets you thinking a little bit about the need for subsidy in order to accomplish this model. So we don't have to get into it, but if you just do the math on, assume for a minute that in the construction, so the city is going to find a developer to build this condo or this co-op. When the co-op is complete, the construction is complete, They're going to sell 20, they're going to create 20 units at 1 bed, 1 bath, 20 units at 2 bed, 2 bath, 10 units at 3 bed, 3 bath. Based on the sales prices that you saw on the slide earlier, that's going to generate in cash 15.6 million, which is going to go to pay down that 20 million it cost you to build the building. So again, you spent 20 million to build it. You are generating from sales of those units 15.6 million. That leaves you with a gap, right? Hopefully everybody can do that math. It doesn't work out without subsidy. So you need a minimum, in this example, of 4.4 million in subsidy in order to accomplish this goal. And again, if you wanted to build to a lower income target, then those sales prices are going to be lower. So that $15 million is going to be lower. And so you're going to need more subsidy. But even in this sort of mid-range deal, you're still talking about almost 100,000 a unit in subsidy. I think we're going to talk later about subsidy, but it exists and it's not unreasonable. And it's actually in our program in New York, that's what we offer. We offer the developers who take advantage of our program $100,000 a unit in subsidy in order to achieve this level of affordability. So I'm going to stop there.
Okay, thank you so much, Dina. And we heard a lot of wows when you just said what you offer in subsidy, which kind of goes back to what Debbie Blinderman was talking about, which where does the subsidy come from? So hold that thought. I know that's probably somebody wrote that down for their Q&A. And Dina, we're going to return back to you, Dina, for some more guidance on this point. Just to be clear, this is a model already used in New York, obviously with different numbers. Is that correct?
Not with very different numbers. It turns out the New York City market and the Key West market are pretty comparable. So yes, this is a model we're running. It actually gets a little cheaper when I go to like.
Okay. So just to be clear, it's not theoretical. It is a model that's already working. It's in practice. Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Dina. And this is a lot of information to absorb. We're going to pile on one more thing, which is the vision. In other words, yes, we've been waiting for 17 years or 20 years to move forward on this property. And we're back at the beginning saying we need to put this out again. And through a lot of discussions, Ms. Halloran, who is, as you know, our city planner, who came to us from Austin and Miami-Dade and has a great amount of experience, keeps bringing up the point that maybe this isn't just a housing project. Maybe it's a gateway to our community. Maybe it's something bigger. Maybe it's something more. And because we're here having this opportunity to talk about it, I want to give the floor to Katie to share some of her ideas and then go back to Dina for a few minutes on some very concrete pieces of advice that she gave us, meaning us, a small group of us working on the strategic plan on this property that we will leave you with. And then we will go to the Q&A. Okay? So I will give the floor to Katie. Thank you, Katie. A great round of applause for her. She's done so much for us.
Okay, hi. Let me share my screen. So I'm going to use a lot of photos because I think that's important for what I'm going to talk about here. Oops. So here's the end of Fort Street, which many of you are probably familiar with this incredible mural and this little sitting space that the community has created that is attached to the historic diesel plant. The major message that I wanted to say today is kind of all encapsulated in this one slide of cake. I have a strong feeling and my professional opinion is that to a degree the community and the city for this particular site and this collection of city-owned properties can have its cake and eat it too. What am I talking about? We know that the first priority for this project is affordable housing and the mix of rental and homeownership I think we're going to talk about today. But what are the other things that we're looking for this site? What are our second, third, and fourth priorities? One thing we've already heard that I think is very important is that we continue to infuse community input along the way during this process. I don't think it will necessarily slow us down. I think it actually might keep the project moving smoothly. So what am I going to suggest, and maybe Ms. Levy as well, is that we find ourselves some excellent technical assistance. We appraise the value of the properties. We then strategically write our request for proposals and bake in some of the community's goals for this project. And then we carefully select our development partners. And it may be more than one. And it may be somebody local and somebody out of town. So what are some of the things I want to bring up with you today? Site design, streetscape, and connectivity. These are planner words that all talk about how do we make this a place that we want to walk to at the end of the day. We're talking here, this is a picture of the space from the air. And if you haven't been there lately, I encourage everybody to just spend a little time there to think about what it is today and what we'd like to see at the end of this project. Site planning. So I've put a few copies on the tables out there. What's interesting is that in 2017, the city hired a consultant, and that consultant looked at Bahama Village, and it specifically put together, this visioning plan that was put together by Ziskovich through Thaddeus Cohen, a past planning director, included just a few paragraphs to talk about this site specifically and a few site plans that are here memorialized in this document. And have we revisited that site plan since 2017? I'm not entirely sure we have, but I hope we can dig a little bit of that into that today. I just wanted to point out this image on the bottom of the screen and the one on the upper left. That's not Key West, but you're starting to see some of what is in my mind that we could expect from this project. We're starting to see outdoor seating. We're starting to see lighting. We're starting to see canopy trees. So again, trying to transfer a little of these concepts and then again hear back from you. This is a diagram that I took from a Dover Coal plan where they're starting to get into talking about what kinds of buildings make sense for these projects. If you look at the first one on the upper left-hand side, this is like the front of a storage unit. You look at something on the lower right-hand side, this is feeling more like Key West. Crosswalks, overhangs, street trees, wider sidewalks. I think these are things that we can and should build into our RFP, and that we should expect our partners to be able to work with us to realize for this site. Again, sidewalks. What kind of sidewalks do we want to have when this project is all finished up and the new homeowners are moving in? On the lower right-hand side, you'll see some pictures of what we have today. We have a dead end. We have a lot of fencing. We have parking lots that are separating the diesel plant and the 3.2 acres from the ocean, and one of the most spectacular waterfront parks, I think, in the country. We also have a telecommunications tower. So all these things that are not conducive to a community center, a social center, are on the ground today, and I think that through this process we can find ways to replace them with an urban space that really we can be proud of, that the new residents could be proud of. One of the important things I think we should look at is connectivity. Again, we have all these resources that are at our fingertips related to this site. Historic Bahama Village is just a stone's throw away from a playground, the brand new athletic fields, Fort Zachary Taylor. In this Ziskovich plan from 2017, it shows that Petronia Street continues through the 3.2 acres. Do we still want to do that? Right now, the mural of the boy, the angel in yellow, blocks the continuation of Fort Street through to Angela. Angela is one way out, and Petronia is one way in. So how are we thinking about how this area functions long term? We'd like to hear from you on that. How does a child who's coming out of the after-school program at the new annex building, how do they get to the playground safely and comfortably? How does an older person who's leaving the clinic get over to the athletic fields? I wanted to ask Commissioner Lopez this, and I did. And I think it's important to talk about it related to this site. Where is the heart of Bahama Village today? And where was it? And if it's gone, could this be the place that is, you want to come at the end of the day and meet somebody on your way out? Can these be outdoor spaces where we meet friends? Can 4th Street adjacent to the diesel plant transform into a main street? Where are these marching bands from the past? Is this the space that they're going to go through? I think it can be. I'll just leave you with, I have a few more slides, but I just can't get over this machinery that's sitting in the diesel plant. I have never yet been in there. I can't wait to go. But this is a landmark, I think. And I think that there's stories related to this building and the people who worked there that all kinds of people want to hear. I want to hear them. I think both locals and visitors alike would really enjoy to hear this history. I think it would draw people to this area. Again, that upper right-hand picture, that's not Key West today, but you're starting to get an idea of where we might endeavor to go. And that lower picture, that is looking south on Angela, looking down the edge of the diesel plant. That today is, not a bike or a pedestrian or a car can come through. So I'm just going to leave it here. Again, the lower left-hand picture, it's not Key West, but it sure looks like someplace that could be here. And I'm just going to read these to you. Secure technical consultant to expedite the project and ensure community goals are baked into our RFP. Establish clear parameters and carefully select our partners. Let's plan for a gateway and a social center with housing. I think we can have both. Requires high-quality design and landscaping, especially shade. Plan for all generations and multimodal connectivity. And let's embrace the history of this important place in the island and maximize the proximity to the waterfront. So that's all I've got. I'm really honored to be able to chat with you a little bit today, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Katie. So these last two presentations are asking us to up-level our thinking about how we want to see this and what we could actually do here. And that's really exciting. And it's great that we're here today to, in a few minutes to get to you and hear your ideas based on what you're hearing here. Okay. I just want to end, if Katie, would you pull your presentation off, with just a few, let's go back to the subsidy and the practical suggestions about how to move forward. And we had a few from Dina, so I'm just going to ask Dina to refer back to them. There were just a quick few suggestions she'll run through. Then we'll turn to the Q&A, so just bear with us for a moment. Okay, Dina, if you can hear us, these are the suggestions that you have made.
Right. So thanks again. And I just want to say I thought Katie's presentation was right on, and that some of my recommendations, I think, dovetail nicely with what was being offered there. But I'm going to go out of order a little bit because Elisa mentioned that people were gasping at 100,000 a unit. And so I want to start with sort of the subsidy, but particularly sort of sounds weird because we've been through such a difficult time, but we're in sort of this moment of opportunity. So if you just sort of set a baseline expectation, I am not aware of any city in the United States and maybe elsewhere where you can build a truly affordable housing without some amount of subsidy. It's just too expensive to build. So even Habitat, who has a great model, you heard they have to layer in all different types of subsidy in order to achieve that outcome. So I think one of the things that Key West might want to think about as you think about the redevelopment effort is how to embrace that and start to sort of go after that money and make sure that you're not leaving it on the table. we are at a moment when there is actually more subsidy coming in for affordable housing than in any time that I can remember. So because of the pandemic and because of the devastation that that has brought to all kinds of people and all kinds of communities, there's been a big push by the federal government, as I'm sure all of you are tracking, to really invest heavily in all types of things that we need, but not least of which is affordable housing. So as a good example, every state gets an allocation from the federal government for a program called HOME every year. HOME is a hard program to use, but also a very flexible like dollar source, and can go to a very high per unit subsidy. So I think it depends on what you're doing, but anywhere from, I think, up to $250,000 a unit in subsidy. Every state under this federal bill that passed is going to get a triple amount of home than they get in any normal year. So they're going to get their normal allocation and then 3 times that amount. I'm actually in charge of that for New York, and I'm panicking about whether I'll be able to spend it. No, I can't ship any of it down here, but the point is there's a bunch of money coming through. That's just one example that like makes it a little bit opportune moment in time for you to be doing this redevelopment to go grab some of those funds. I would further recommend that the city be the one to think about being the applicant for those dollars, because there are prioritizations under the federal guidelines that when a city or a municipality applies to the state for their share, they are automatically bumped to a higher, their application is treated more favorably than if it was a private application. So I think there are real dollars. There's other programs we could mention that are also getting big increases this year. There are new voucher programs that are being offered. So it's, I think, to Katie's point about getting some technical assistance so that you're very clear about what dollars have come into the state and the county, which of those dollars is Key West entitled to or prioritized for, and how to get those in order to attach them to the redevelopment project, as opposed to asking the developers to necessarily go get all the sources of funding independently, might put a real advantage to attracting, first of all, getting the subsidy that you need, and then attracting more development, development capacity to the potential site. Going back to something we touched on very briefly, the city explained to me that there has been historically a ground lease structure in place. And while, that is not necessarily a good or a bad thing, I would strongly encourage you all to think about whether you want to continue with that model and whether the city wants to hold a long-term ground lease on this site and potentially the diesel site, or whether you want to restrict its use through a slightly more maybe easier to think about and easier to get financing on, which is just a long-term regulatory agreement. And so we've talked about that. You can put as the agency that's giving out the subsidy or giving out the land, you can say, well, anybody who buys this land, whether it's rental or home ownership, is going to have to treat it generationally as affordable housing for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or 99 years, recognizing that there has to be people 99 years from now who know where those documents are and are enforcing them. There's a real, I think, potential benefit from a development standpoint and from a private financing standpoint in terms of attracting money to the project if you were to use a regulatory agreement structure as opposed to a ground lease. I think it was discussed earlier by Habitat, tax abatements are very, very common in any place. When I worked in Newark, when I worked in Dallas, Texas, when I worked in many states across cities across New York State, tax abatements are usually a pretty critical component and offered usually by municipalities and counties as an enticement to build more affordable housing. It also allows for the housing to be more affordable, whether it's renter or home ownership, because the monthly expense to live there goes down a bit. And it doesn't have to be a permanent tax abatement. I know the city is concerned about giving up revenue, but it could be a sort of phased tax abatement that perhaps goes up over the years or goes down, right? But it's certainly another enticement to developers as well as a way to achieve affordability on the back end. Katie touched on this, but this notion of a gateway I think makes a lot of sense. And I think when you're thinking about building affordable housing, particularly now, you want to think about what's serving that community. Is it built in isolation? Is it connected to other important things? Does it feel like part of a community? Does it feel like just sort of a project that got dumped down? There might be real benefit to thinking about linking these two sites. So the 3.2 acres and the diesel site And while I recognize that there's going to be a lot of environmental considerations and work that would have to be done to make that site buildable, you might also think about, a higher capacity developer potentially who could work in partnership with local developers. If you merged the two sites, that would be more attractive and also allow you to think more globally about what you're trying to achieve there. So it's more expensive to build a housing project on the 3.2 acres and then go around and say, okay, well, we want more housing on this site and commercial, rather than thinking it of all as one large scale project with perhaps phases to it. It's also another way, I think, where you would bring more private lending institutions. You're going to need a bank, obviously, here. So the whole thing won't be achieved through subsidy. You're going to need, JP Morgan Chase or Morgan Stanley or Wells Fargo or Bank of America or whoever your local lenders are. And I think the sort of more they can think about this as one project and transactionally merging some of the effort, the cheaper it is and the more attractive it is. Katie also touched on intermediaries. You would not be alone in needing this. There are two organizations nationally that I have worked with throughout my entire career. One is called Enterprise Community Partners. The other is called the Local Initiative Support Corporation, or LISC for short. They exist to do nothing but help create affordable affordable housing and other types of affordable and socially driven community development. They operate in most places in the country, including here in Florida. And in New York, they are fundamental to, I would say 50 to 60% of the affordable housing that gets built. They are involved in both pulling together the capital stack, meaning all the different sources of subsidy and private debt. They also both happen to be tax credit syndicators. So when you're using tax credits, they're often involved in the actual sale of those credits. And they are just excellent at sort of thinking through, how to structure these types of proposals and also how to vet them. And I think both would be super interested potentially in working with you on this initiative. And then the last thing I'll say, and this is something I'm struggling with myself, so I can't endorse it 100%, but it is becoming more and more part of the conversation around affordable housing. Because your development costs are so high here in Key West, going back to the $400,000 per unit, again, that's very much comparable to like what it costs to build in Brooklyn. That's outrageous. It's really expensive. And materials are getting more expensive by the week post-COVID. One of the things people have been looking at are like factory built or modular housing construction as a way to bring down some of those costs. And it doesn't necessarily have to be all of the project, it could be a part of the project, but there have been some varying degrees of success, real cost savings achieved by having housing built in a factory where weather doesn't slow you down, where materials are sort of pre-purchased in an aggregated way. There are a number of innovative modular developers that are starting to come into this space. I will share after with Katie and Elisa a link to this competition site in California in which dozens and dozens of these innovative tech modular companies are starting to compete for who can bring the costs down the most. I would say for a new development like this, even for just a piece of the project, I would consider looking at that. And again, that's an outsider's opinion, so you can take it or leave it. But I do think you're onto a very cool project here, and I'll be excited to see what you build.
Okay, thank you so much, Dina. Well, is anyone else's head full? Let's open the floor up to Q&A. If you would just be kind enough to keep your questions or comments fairly brief, and we'll let the panelists answer them. We have about 30 minutes for that, and then we're going to break into groups, and guess what? You become the panelists. We start asking you for your guidance. So, would anybody like to start? There's microphones on the table. Please just take one. If you need it, you can slip it out of the, you can pass the whole mic, or you can slip it out of the holder and use it that way. Anyone? Okay, let's start over here. Yes, ma'am. Just press the button on it. There's either a button that you push up. There you go.
Okay, is this working?
It is.
This is a question for Dina. On the HOME program that you discussed, the federal program called HOME, who administers that at the state level?
So it's my understanding, so all the money starts with HUD, right? So HUD allocates it based on a formula every year. and there's an allocation based on population. Home typically goes to the State Housing Finance Agency. So here that's FHFC, do I have the initials right? The Florida Housing Finance Corporation. And then they are expected to allocate that, usually through a competitive process, to either private developers or to municipalities directly.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
I have two questions, one for Terry and one for Katie. Terry, with the Habitat for Humanity, are those restricted affordable once they're completed?
Yes, they're permanently affordable housing. And through Habitat, so if somebody is moving away, then we always have the right of first refusal, and we purchase it back. And we, interestingly, our formula is 2.5%, the same as was mentioned earlier, for that, so people build equity, what they paid in, plus 2.5% per year, not compounded. And then once we purchase the house back, then we sell it again at whatever the new rate is for the market value of that house. It's permanently restricted affordable housing.
That's great. Then we don't have to worry about that falling into the hands of a second homeowner or vacationer, that type of thing.
Right.
Katie, for you, and you and I have had this discussion before. The 3.2 is in a TIF district. Have we given any thought into how the TIF can play into the financing maybe down the road of this project, or of a project, whatever it could be?
Yes, I've talked to our chief financial officer a little bit about this, and as he said, and it made me laugh in a meeting, he's like, we're both working at the very edges of our areas of expertise here, aren't we? And I said, yes, we are. But yes, I mean, I think that there is like someone said earlier, a sweet spot in the type of development that's put on this site that achieves a bunch of goals at once. And one of them may be some type of return to the TIF that's higher than another type of model or percentages of development. Obviously, no one wants to put retail where it's not going to work, or a restaurant where it's not going to work. But there's folks out there in the world who have the technical expertise to guide us on that note, and I think we don't want to miss an opportunity, and we want that guidance. That's what I'd say.
Okay, very good. Yes, Commissioner Kaufman. Oh, just push the button up.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, to follow up on that question, by the way, thanks for being here. Really appreciate this and the focus on the 3.2 and on affordable housing. With regard to the CRA and the TIF, we talked about this in January and the possibility of the CRA taking the lead for financing. And I know there's interest on our BVRAC potentially to do that. And we talked about the potential of going to the Dade County, Miami-Dade County League of Cities, so the League of Cities, to determine what CRA resources there are elsewhere, because there are many examples, right, of major developments in Miami-Dade and elsewhere in Florida. It's a little bit confusing to me because when we were here in January, we were focused on, a smaller project potentially. Now we're talking about maybe including the diesel plant. So one question is, are we biting off too much, and is this going to end up perhaps delaying the project and at the expense of affordable housing sooner than later? That's one question. The second question, and I know there's a lot of questions, but the second question is, if we were to just focus on affordable housing, I'm a little bit confused by what Dina said, because she was talking about federal funds perhaps available to the city and probably our CRA, and that would that mean that the city is the applicant and then simply hiring a contractor? Is that what we're talking about? Or are we talking about partnering at the forefront? The question is, what is the RFP for? Is the RFP for the whole package development, or is it simply just hiring a contractor and the city, and this truly being a city project through our CRA with our BVRAC advisory board? So I'm a little bit confused by the direction. You know, we had what I thought was a great proposal from AHI, which was really simple to me. I mean, it was, you know, we had our emphasis on low and very low on the rental aspect with a homeownership component, which we all want. And then, you know, now we're kind of expanding the vision. I'm not opposed to that, but I think we also need a clear vision about, well, what does that mean? What are the next steps? And I'm a little bit confused by this. I don't know to the extent you can answer those questions, but I would appreciate it.
Let's start with the delay question, and I don't know if that's, and then we'll get to the question about the funding. Katie?
I thought that would be a question that would come up. I don't necessarily think that looking at the RFP more holistically has to mean that it slows the process down. I think by partnering with an expert in this field, we will do ourselves a favor. I don't think necessarily, I you know, just in the short time I've been here, I've seen some RFPs and projects go sideways or slow down because they weren't maybe fully digested by the time they went out. So I think a couple months, are we talking a couple months maybe to acquire a consultant who can help us make sure we are writing a very well-rounded RFP? I think it might actually save us time, but I defer to the housing experts here. I just see that this property is an opportunity. I think it's an important part of Key West, so I don't think we can treat it like a housing development anywhere else on the island. But I think somebody mentioned the word phasing, and I think that's important, that we can stipulate step A1 for this project is to get those housing units started. And then, you know, what comes next comes next. But time is of the essence. I think that we can build that into our partnership.
Good. Does anybody else want to speak to that piece? No. Dina, did you want to say something about the question regarding whether or not we partner with a developer or contract a
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry if that got confusing to the commissioner. Generally speaking, when a city is seeking development, in my experience, the city will also provide subsidy as a pass-through to a developer. So I was not suggesting that the city be the developer, and in fact, I would probably strongly urge against it. I was suggesting that as part of the package that you're RFPing, you would have land that you would do an assessment on, value at a certain whatever, and structure an agreement for how you will be compensated for the donation of that land or the sale of that land to the project. And you would include a term sheet on the amount of subsidy that the city itself can provide as a pass-through based on commitments that you've secured through either the city, the state, the county, or the federal government.
Is that okay? Clear? Okay. Let's take a few more questions. Let's go to another part of the room. Yes. Brian Green? Oh, sorry. Commissioner Wardlow. Okay. And then Brian Green. Yes.
No, I don't know who to ask, but we were talking about the rent to own. When that is, if somebody does get something to rent to own, do they pay taxes and insurance on that on top of their affordable rent? Or how does that work?
Can one of you answer that?
I can give a little bit, I think, towards that. We don't have a rent to own, but the way that we structure the mortgage requires a very small amount up front. And so far, all the families that I've dealt with personally, their mortgage payment is less than their rent. So they're paying less per month, and they're paying taxes and insurance. Is along with, and we have HOAs in our developments, so they're also paying the HOA, and it's still less than their rent, as those of us who know a lot about Key West can easily understand. So, but we don't have rent to own. We just structure it in the beginning with a very affordable model.
Okay. Anyone else want to respond to that on the panel? Debbie?
Just as a point of clarification, when you tap into the Florida housing tax credits or tax exempt bonds, that is not a rent-to-own viable, situation. It's all rental.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Mr. Green?
I have a question and a comment, if I may. The question, I was looking at Dina's numbers. She talks about 90 to 100% AMI, and I just want us to be clear what we're talking about, because 90 to 100% AMI in Monroe County is for a single person 71,200, going up to, for a 4-person household, 101,700. So we need to be very careful in thinking that the model that she's showing is a model that we can roll out in Key West unless this is really what we mean. I don't think when most people talk about affordable housing, workforce housing in Key West, they're thinking about these numbers. I think they're talking about something which is much less. And when you start to talk about numbers which are much less, then the funding streams and the road to success comes down to Florida finance and tax credit funding, because that's the only way you can do for lower income housing. The alternative to that is a European model. I haven't done 100% public financed affordable housing in Europe since Margaret Thatcher. What happened when Margaret Thatcher came along was she said, this is not the role of public government to provide affordable housing. It's a role of developers, and developers will provide affordable housing as part of the planning game. So that typically we have one here. We have one through the steam plant, an unbelievably successful public-private arrangement there whereby you've got shared equity in the railway condos, which was it wasn't a quid pro quo, but just imagine it to be a typical European model, where in order to build a steam plant, you have to build affordable housing. Didn't happen here, but that would be the European model. So we have opportunities here which we shouldn't dismiss, that there are opportunities by the combination of the diesel generating plant. There's opportunities here to perhaps have market rate as part of the 3.2 to cross-subsidize the affordable housing. So there's quite a lot to think about, but I don't want us to think this is easy, because the numbers which Dina is talking about are not the numbers I think most people here in Key West think we are talking about for affordable housing.
Okay, Dina,
Can I just respond to that? Yeah, just very quickly. So I just wanted to say two things. One is I appreciate the point. You know, we are also trying to serve in New York people at 60% of the AMI and 80% of the AMI and sometimes 30% of the AMI. I used the 90 to 110 because the numbers that I looked up I thought were for a workforce housing model. But as I said at the top of the presentation, you can structure this at any income range you want, provided, to your point, that you can get the amount of subsidy that you need in order to buy down those construction dollars. I do want to say that it's wrong, that is not the only tax credit financing, which you can't really do home ownership, is the only subsidy source that could go to that depth of subsidy. Home is a very good example, but there are others. I don't know that there's been a full analysis done by this group, frankly, into what the state has by way of affordable housing finance. I totally take your point. You could say 90 to 110% is not what we were thinking. We want to go lower than that. And I would encourage you to do it. I just think you should be sober about the fact that you'll need additional subsidy, and also sober about the fact that that subsidy is out there. It's just a question of whether you're going to get it or not.
okay.
Can I add something? Because I'm 100% with Dina. You know, affordable housing goes up, as far as I know, to 120%. And you can talk to many, many, many people in this town that are at 120% of AMI, and they cannot afford to buy a house. So, you know, I think there is room in affordable housing to think all the way through all these different income levels. And there are definitely people in our community at 120% AMI that can't afford a house. And Habitat focuses on the 80%, but there's lots of other folks that are in those other areas that also need affordable housing.
Okay, so a related and important point. Okay, I saw that Commissioner Davila, and then I see that Mr. Swift. Why don't we give the floor to Commissioner Davila and then to Ed Swift?
I just had a quick question. I'm not sure if anyone from the city can answer, but I know we're talking about including the diesel plant as part of this now. Do we have any kind of indication as to what the environmental remediation costs would be for the diesel plant? And will that slow the project down if we're combining it, or how is that going to function?
Can Katie, is that something that you can speak to, or I don't even know if Steve might
I
speak to?
see Steve over here. I've heard that it's in the realm of $1 million, and he may have some other numbers.
Is that right, Steve? It would be about $1 million.
I think the general idea is, can we get a little expertise as to what the benefits would be if we would consider including the diesel plant in the package? Maybe the answer is separate them. We've heard that from BVRAC. I know they have some specific commercial endeavors in mind for that project. Maybe they want to use some TIF money, but I'm not sure that just because you wrap it all up into one kind of complex project that you necessarily do yourself a disservice. I guess my suggestion is just that we ask somebody who's done 25 projects like this to take a quick look at what we have in front of us and make some recommendations. Steve, do you want to add to that?
Do you want, there's a mic over there at your table if you want, if someone can move it towards Steve. Or you can have mine.
Give a mic stand.
Oh,
Stand up.
I don't know that I'm the guy to talk about whether it's best to put it all together or split it in half. That's not my thing. I will just, because I didn't have a mic earlier, though, the last environmental update we got was in 16, and so there's thought that it could be up to maybe $1 million to get that to the residential standard environmentally.
And just to be clear, as I'm hearing it, no one's saying we have to decide right now should we or should we not, but that perhaps we should ask a consultant to help guide us and explore. Is that correct, Katie? Okay. Mr. Swift, and then I see that Liz was. Oh no.
All I was saying was 1 million. That's what
Oh, you were saying 1 million. Okay, Mr. Swift.
When I studied this some years ago when we were doing the railway, and I went to look at the steam plant because it was the same ownership, the cost of the remediation environmentally was much lower per square foot on this property. And there's a bunch of reasons why, but at that time it was $375,000. Now that's gone up because that was back in '77, so there's been an increase probably in that, but you do not have the soil pollution that you had at the steam plant where they dumped thousands and thousands and thousands of millions of gallons of fuel went on the ground. In this case, you don't have that. So this can be remediated. I've always looked at one of the brick structures down there as a community center that would work in with the housing. I just want to say that I think retail and commercial use of any of this property down there, and I would combine the, not me personally, because I'm out of the affordable housing business. I am not going to bid on it. I'm not going to work on it. I'll help, but this property needs to be ownership based, and it needs to be housing, and it needs to be combined. And when you gave away, the city gave away the thing for a beer garden development, I think it was in the newspaper, you were, at some point, didn't you all give it away for the city said that they were going to have a brewery. Right. I was very much saddened. I was hoping that you'd come back around to this, and I think you're back around to a really great thing. And I also would say I'd do two other things. One is go to the 42-foot height limit because of flooding. You can get away with it. They're doing it in the county. They're doing it all over. And we should pick up those extra 5 feet because you can get an extra floor of housing and have 9-foot ceilings in your units. And if you don't do that, you're at an 8-foot ceiling and you create all kinds of problems. So go to the 42 feet and get out of the 35 feet. And that may take changing something, but do that and you will have more people live there. The other thing is the gentrification of Bahama Village has been absolutely disgusting and discouraging. And I think that if you don't have ownership here and create ownership in a way, whether it's the habitat model or whatever model you want to use. But to go to the federal financing for your subsidy, you pick up all kinds of rules and regulations and things that will keep you away from ownership. And I think ownership in this area is incredibly important. And that's everything I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we're going to get to you for sure, Scott. Does anybody want to respond to the comments that you're hearing or add on to it, any of you panelists? Okay, thank you, Mr. Swift. Scott Pridgeon from A.H. Monroe.
Is it on?
Oh,
Is
and
it on?
then
And it's on.
Commissioner Weekly, yes.
Just a comment, the long-term regulatory agreement that Dina mentioned that could be a possibility for the city versus a ground lease has just a comment that the city may want to consider, or an idea, is to parcel the property off so that phases could be done, in the sense where if the property could be phased, say for instance, workforce was going to require 1.5 acres of the project, for that to be a separate parcel so that development could go ahead and start, as well as home ownership would be parceled to a certain size depending on, you know, how many would be built. Same thing for parcel for the diesel plant, so that you can maximize the funding for each parcel based on the partnership with those developers in order to maximize all the funding you can get overall. And that way, something that Katie's vision, which I like, I think is a very good idea, that you could actually, with this long-term regulatory agreement, to make sure that all of the partners realize that one vision of that seamless look, but each parcel would have its own guidelines or its own portion to that developer in order to build what you want on each.
So not just
each one.
phasing, but parceling.
But parceling with the phasing.
Okay. Anybody have thoughts on that? Katie, Dina? No?
Can I add one thought, not directly about what Scott said, but something that Dina said? Our last 3 projects have all been modular. So you were talking about that. We costed it out if we did a stick build, and we could not come close on a stick build to what we get modular. So our last 3 projects have been, the basic house has been built up in Ocala, transported down here, put on the piers and foundation that we have here, and that's been much more cost effective. So just to let you know on what Dina was saying.
Okay. Good. We have time for a couple more questions, and we'll go to that.
Lee, can I just,
Commissioner
I'm
Weekly?
sorry, add one very quick thing?
Sure, yes.
Super quick. I just want to say, first of all, that's good to hear about the modular, and I might want to talk to you because we're struggling in New York with that. But on this notion about home ownership and state subsidy, there seems to be some consensus in the room that you can't get subsidy for deeply affordable home ownership, and it's just not true. The home program by itself allows for home ownership, and the only restriction is that you serve people below 80, like Habitat does. And it only comes depending on how much subsidy you put in, with a home-imposed 15-year limit. And so you can build equity. So I would just urge the group not to leap to judgment that tax credits, which is I know what you're most familiar with, which only does rental and is complicated, that is not the only subsidy source. And in New York, we use all kinds of federally driven subsidies to create affordable home ownership. You also have a mortgage liquidity agency at the Florida Housing Finance Agency that's doing some very interesting things with down payment assistance. So not only is the subsidy available for the construction, but when the buyer comes in, if they're using the Florida Housing Finance Agency mortgage product, they can also qualify for this down payment assistance that is often treated as a forgivable grant.
Okay.
Exactly right.
So we don't know what we don't know. We have that discussion a lot. Okay, Commissioner Weekly?
Yeah, so I'm not sure who can answer this, but a question that I have is, the Navy still has to sign off. Are we meeting all the requirements that they're asking us to meet as far as setbacks go, height limits, and that type of thing? Do we know any answers to that? There was also talk about the relocation of the tower that's over there. Is that part of this? This needs to be part of the conversation as well, I believe. So if we
Yeah.
can if we can get answers to, because if the property is at 3.2 because of setback requirements and that type, then the amount of housing you're able to put there is going to shrink as well. And the same thing with height limits.
I think Katie or Steve might be able to speak to that.
You want to talk about your conversations with the Navy about the,
Yeah, like for instance, the 35 feet, I think they put that restriction in there because that was our code. And they talked about setbacks, sort of, instead of saying, you know, the setback limit is don't come, 30 feet or whatever, kind of show us what you're thinking and we'll approve it or not approve it. But it seems like the current group is amenable to working with us. The tower is active, the Coast Guard uses it and the Navy uses it. It's crucial to both missions. I think they did a rough estimate of like $1 million to move it. I don't think they want to move it on their own. But I think if somehow we thought that property was worth it and we came up with a place to put it, that's another problem too. And I don't know that they'd be amenable to having it somewhere on their property, but they might if we moved it at our expense.
But we haven't had that discussion yet.
Have not.
Right, okay. Let's go to just this quarter of the room here. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts for the panel?
I have a
Ms. Young?
question for the wonderful Habitat lady. Thank you. Jerry, wondering two questions. One, what is your density when you get a piece of land? How do you decide how many homes you're going to put on the property? Because for me, all the things that I've looked at for the 3.2 acres, that 40 units or 50 units doesn't seem at all part of like what Katie's vision is for the area and for the village and for the island. And then my second question is, what does your waiting list look like?
Okay, two things. So one thing about density is the construction committee tells me, I'm not on the construction committee, they never want to leave density on the table. So, if a property allows for 20 units, you want to build 20 units. So don't leave density on the table is what I hear from the construction people. But I'm not a construction person and they could answer that question a lot better. We don't have a waiting list because we do for our rentals, but we don't for home ownership because every time we have homes that are ready to be sold, we open up an application period for a period of months and we do community information and then we set a deadline for when those applications are due. And then after all the applications come in, then we rank them. So we don't keep a waiting list. And part of that is because, we've built in Big Pine, Big Coppet, and Cudjoe, and individually on Summerlin and Big Pine. And some people, don't want to live. They want to live in different places. And so there isn't a waiting list. There's an application period that closes.
So my question then would be, if you have 10 homes, how many applications do you get that are qualified? Are you getting 3 times as many? How many people are you turning away? I'll say.
And I'm also not on the homeowner selection committee, so I'm going by what I remember from board meetings. When we built Lowy Landing, we had, Warren, do you remember how many houses we had at Lowy Landing, whether it was 10 or 16?
Yeah, I believe I'm not quite sure that number either is either 10 or 16, but to answer your question regarding application, yesterday I believe we were going through at least 15 for the projects on Cudjoe. On average, when we put an request for applications, we get about 10 to 15. Now all obviously will be qualified because there are different levels of qualification.
So is that triple the amount of the space you have?
It really
Yeah,
does. It really does depend because when we built Lowy Landing, I forget how many units are at Lowy Landing, but we had 400 applications for either 10 or 16. Now, a bunch of those applications didn't qualify because they weren't in that sweet spot of you make enough money to be able to pay your mortgage, but not so much that you don't qualify. So out of the 400 applications we got for those 10 or 16 houses, I don't know how many of them qualified that we ranked. My memory is that it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 times the number of units that we had. Now, the one that we're building now that's all the way out in Cudjoe, we don't have as many people applying for the housing out in Cudjoe as we did for Big Coppet. You know, mile marker 10, you know, versus 30 is, you know, a different place to live. So it really does depend on the unit. I would expect in Key West the applications would be sky high.
Just to clarify, when we follow up with the notes, which we'll send all of you who have an email, we can get that number from Christina, okay? So good. If there's any one last dying, burning question, we'll take it, Mayor. And then we're gonna put you into groups and ask you some questions. So, Mayor. You just push it up. Yeah.
Got it. First of all, just one comment, and Dina, thank you so much for bringing up the concept of wealth building. It's an added bonus that I don't think any of us thought about for a community that hasn't had many opportunities in the past to build wealth and stay in the city of Key West. So thank you so much. It's an important point. Second of all, and Katie, I don't want to talk for you, but I think what Katie is saying is let's not sell ourselves short. You know, let's go out to the people who do this on a grand scale every single day, who know where the funding is, who knows where the subsidies are, who knows how to build. And let's make this a project with one of the few remaining very precious areas that we have in the city of Key West. And we have one opportunity to do it right and to connect it with a park that we put so much time and sweat and money into. And it just makes so much sense that if you have people out there that are willing to take a look and say, yes, you know, your RFP says we have to build your home ownership and your rentals first. Get that done, and then maybe 3 years down the road, you start working on the diesel plan. And I think sometimes we get lost in the weeds with how much is it going to cost to mitigate and how much is, that's all part of the development plan. I mean, that's their issue, and they're experts at that. So I would love to see us take this opportunity and to make this the very best project that we can for the benefit of the people in Bahama Village and our community.
That was a terrific last point. Panelists, any final words from you? So what we're being challenged with in some, and to add on to what the mayor's saying, is to think about this in a more expansive way in terms of how we use the property, how we attract funding, how we can build wealth, and what it might physically even look like. And to that point, it's time to turn to you and hear what you think based on all of the discussions you've had today. So let me stop there and just say thank you so much to our panelists. Can we have a final round of applause? Dina, Debbie, Terry, thank you, Katie. I also want to take a moment just to thank the people who set this up today. Dorian, who was in the back of the room, was always silent, did all the table setup with Daniel. Where's Daniel? There he is. And to Jason, who does all of our AV. So we are very lucky to have such a great team here. And what we're going to do now is we're going to have Daniel facilitate one group, Katie one group, and me one group. We're going to ask you the same questions, and we're going to flip chart your responses. The information you give us, it's not the definitive answer on how the RFP is going to get developed. Clearly, we need to speak more to BVRAC, more to the community, but it's a very good start, and we want to get moving on this quickly, as you all know. So we're taking your feedback very much to heart, very seriously, and we're going to do that for about the next 45 minutes, and then we'll come back and hear what the collective thinking is. I only have one request. We have 5 commissioners at that table, 2 at this table, and none here. Could I ask, I don't know, Commissioner Wardlow and Commissioner Lopez, would you come join this group so we have commissioner presence in every group? Or whoever wants to. I just looked at you because you're sitting closest. But, you know, Commissioner Weekly, Commissioner Davila, Commissioner Hoover, whoever. Just 2 of you come over here, and we have about... Okay, Katie, we're going to come back.
I don't know the answer to that. I'm suspecting yes, because whenever there's a housing authority project, the city of Key West has a lot of
equity into that. I mean, we've got a new
Well, you guys
103
you have to have all the
unit
answers
housing
now.
project going on College Road. The city appraised our land at $6.3 million. Housing Authority is going to buy it. We're going to put it back into the project. We're giving them $8 million worth of land equity funds. But at the end of the day, that project is owned, operated, and managed by the city of Wisconsin. So I'm going to say I'm
How do we want to split this between rental and home ownership? Was it half and half or 70-30? We had about half of the table that said half and half of the table that said 70-30. And there was pretty good reasoning for both. I think that the table overall agreed that 70-30 was what we would head with, and the reason is that it's most important to build home ownership so that we can build a heart in Bahama Village and build a place where everybody can look out for each other, and that is done through home ownership from what I've seen. But of course, we do want those other folks to be able to come on in as well. And I'll let Monroe handle the 1, 2s, and 3s of the bedrooms and single families and whatnot.
So when we were discussing what it is that we wanted to see, home ownership, obviously, to foster the community, we decided that we would look at HOAs, and that HOAs would be the primary way that we would go about tying the community together. And we would like to look at the home program that was mentioned in the presentation today. We did like the model of Habitat for Humanity because of the courses that they have to take, and they prepare you for the home ownership component. So we thought that that should definitely be included. And we decided to go with more families. So we said that on Stock Island, we're doing a lot of one bedrooms. We have Marty's Place. We have a lot of different projects that go for the one bedrooms, even though, and you know, that's where the biggest demand is. But if we're looking to keep families here and we're looking to foster a community, then we're really looking at 2, 3 bedroom units where people can actually grow and there's space to actually develop and have a family. Okay, so we also looked at the component AHI, portion used for the benefit of the immediate area. And what we were saying was at the time was that whatever goes in that slot of land, it has to take from the proposal, and it has to include something like a daycare or a community development, economic development a component that adds value to the immediate facility that's there. Okay.
That's just question 1. You were bleeding into question 2. So hold it there. Let's go through question 1.
Okay, sure.
Each group. Okay, so a 70-30 split, HOA, more family, we're getting that, pursue home funding. Let's go to this group. What was if you could even tell us the proportion that you felt was useful for home ownership?
Yes, for our group, yeah. We thought on the proportion, you wrote a lot. We spoke a lot.
Just give us the main points.
60 and 40.
60 for
60
home ownership?
for home ownership and 40 for rental. We spoke about the percentage of Key West employees, I mean City of Key West employees that do not, are not being able to own a house, and how important it is to find that specific number where just like people can really afford a property. It's very important for our group just like to give the community and citizens that opportunity to own a building.
Okay, were there any other points that you talked about with regards to home ownership that you want us to know? I see there's a lot there. Any of the major points that came up?
Like that, HIA had range, there was an emphasis on just like having that rental and ownership. And we spoke more regarding also connectivities that we will just like go into.
You want more connectivity on the.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone want to add anything here to that? Okay, Anita's covered it. Can I just ask you a question? When you said 70-30, you meant 70 rental, 30 home ownership? No. 70. Okay, so we're hearing a lot more home ownership, the majority or at least half of home ownership. ownership. Can we go to this group? I'm going to call this group the outliers. Okay, let's go. Hold it. Yeah.
Well, this is probably a fatal mistake of people to put the three developers on one table, particularly putting Ed Swift and myself on the table. And it may come as a bit of a surprise to you because the view that we came to is that we believe that the greatest added value on this site is home ownership. And we believe that we should actually not say 70-30, 80-20. In fact, I can tell you, because I helped Scott write the AH proposal, and that was based on 80-20, but that was because AH's primary mission in the past has always been through Florida finance on rental. But our eyes have been opened today over Dina's comments about home ownership and equity. And we think there is huge potential here, and we should not rule out even 100% home ownership if it's viable, if it's fundable, and we don't think we know enough. Our recommendation is if we were in the wheelhouse, in parallel with the work which Katie is doing, we think there is a task here to look at how could we get funding for home ownership, what sort of size could it be, and the reason we are so keen on home ownership is because thereby lays wealth creation, thereby lays income stream into TIF, thereby lays a changeover of generations. One of the problems with rental is it tends to be fixed. Somebody goes in there in 2021 and they're there for the entire life because there is no exit strategy. The thing about home ownership is that it can be stepped so that people can actually grow through that, and as they grow wealthier they can then move on and somebody else comes in and takes over from them. That's what we've been seeing in railway condos, and that's why this table recommends if we can get 100%, that's what we would do.
Okay, let me just stop there and say what we're hearing from all three groups is a recognition today that this is A, more critical than perhaps we had thought, and B, maybe more doable. Because before, we hadn't had a discussion of how it can get done. Of course, the subsidy is the issue, and to Brian's point, the bottom line recommendation here is we don't know enough, and we need to take a step back and explore the possibilities here more deeply, which, by the way, does take time. So you realize there's an opportunity cost between time and getting this done. Okay, so I just want to make that clear to everyone. Okay, so that's where we are with the home ownership piece for now, which is a good enough guidance, I would say, Katie, for starters. Let's go to the second question, unless anyone wants to say anything else on the first. No? Let's go to the second one. Aside from housing, what are the most important features and amenities for the property and the immediate surrounding area? Let's start this time with this group here. Katie, anyone want to speak to that? And then we're going to go to you, Mr. Swift.
I want to speak on home ownership.
Oh, you do? Okay, hold on. I'm sorry, Katie. Mr. Swift said he had just one more comment on home ownership. Sorry. Yes, sir.
You know, we talked about gentrification in Bahama Village, but even more importantly is gentrification in Key West. We are not building generational continuance anymore in our community. It's people who are buying homes here, mostly from out of town, mostly for cash, and call it the conch community, or the ongoing generational community is dying out. And if we want our city to remain what it has been and get better, I think we have to do that, and that's why I think the housing's so important.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, thank you. Let's go to the point about what we want to see. So who is going to speak in Katie's group? Is it Katie or Anid or somebody else this time?
Somebody else want to take a stab? Well,
Katie, you need a mic. Somebody give Katie the mic.
So we talked about a link to history and culture, whatever that specifically means. We talked about how this land, we have heard from some that has been taken, that maybe there should be some sort of memorial or information for the public on that. We talked about opportunities for new entrepreneurs, small locally owned businesses, food sale opportunities, and we talked about how some small businesses start with a food truck, and is there a space for that in this site? We talked about whether this parking lot right here might be an opportunity. And then there was some question about whether, the city should be subsidizing rent for small businesses, or whether that's an opportunity that the CRA should have to look at specifically. And we did talk about how, like with homeownership, you can also build wealth through entrepreneurial endeavors. We talked about parking. We talked about, again, how there's a lack of food in this area, and if there is some kind of food opportunity, it should be linked somehow to the waterfront. We should take advantage of the location. We talked about potential for small grocery with local products, maybe something related to the farmers market becoming more permanent. We talked about an emphasis on fresh food, and that there's historically been markets in Bahama Village. I think that's more or less what we talked about as far as uses. Did I miss anything?
Okay, so food, markets, interesting. In contrast to this discussion, would you, you can do it again, Brian, or someone else can do it?
Yeah, as question one, we go about it a different way altogether.
That's question two, though. So we're just talking about the amenities.
Yeah.
It does relate to question one. So
Our position is we do recommend that the 3.2 be 100% housing and no other, except for that which is needed to support the 100, let's call it, for the sake of the argument, 100 houses. So there may be, a crash, there may be a bit, but that's entirely related to the 100 units. We think that insofar as there are other activities such as those which you've just outlined, they should be in the diesel generating plant, and we think that you should separate out the RFP for the diesel generating plant from the housing. We don't think that the two are coexist happily. They're not the same developer, they're not the same end user, and we think there are ways in which you can cross-subsidize within the diesel generating plant.
Just to add to that point, there was some discussion, though, about phasing and we just said it, but parceling and phasing out.
Yes, I mean, we think there are opportunities here for maybe 3 or 4 different phases on the site, but certainly the Bender scheme, which goes back to 2016 or before, it was for a different period, a different era, when there was viable to put shops and offices down there. There are too much empty commercial space in Key West in order to justify building more retail or
So this group was saying, if you want to do retail, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you want to do commercial, it should really just be to service the needs of the community, not as a big income generating effort. We are looking there. They were saying we are looking to build housing. We should stick to housing and on that 3.2 acres at least. Correct? Did I get that right? Yes. Okay. Which again kind of bleeds question 1 and 2 together. Let's go to that group because we're hearing very different ideas here.
Yeah. So first thing, Patty made sure that I mentioned that we agree strongly with the fresh market somewhere in the area, and that there is a food desert in Bahama Village. There's nowhere to buy an onion on a consistent basis. Trust me. Well, we actually we were actually very close to this group. We also said that the 3.2 should be dedicated completely to housing, and essentially the diesel plant should be reserved for the economic or commercial side of the project. On that side of the project, on the diesel plant side of the project, we were looking at things like a museum, a restaurant and bar, and a gym, and a convention space. We were also talking about the ability for a museum or a convention space that has the capacity to showcase the history of Bahama Village, so that that whenever you enter that building or that facility, you get an understanding of what this community stood for and stands for currently. And also there's a demand for convention space. I believe Steve had mentioned that it's one of the priorities for the TDC to have more convention space in the Florida Keys. And if we could somehow fit that into the scope of this project, I think that would go a long ways with the TDC and their funding. We also spoke to gentrification and the fact that any development that does happen needs to make sure that it goes to benefit the community that the conveyance says that it's supposed to benefit. And that was a key, that was something that we had mentioned throughout. I mean, I think everyone pretty much had the same ideas there. And and one of the coolest things that Commissioner Lopez ended on was the fact that he parlayed off of what Katie said earlier, and he said that we are creating a new heart for Bahama Village. We are creating that space where people can return to and congregate and be a part of a community. And in the scope of that, that's what we're in the grand scheme of what we're trying to accomplish here. We are trying to recreate that heart of Bahama Village and bring it back to life. Yeah, and that was that. Thank you.
Okay, so if we're looking for threads here between all the groups, what we're hearing is that no one's talking about, and we'll get to the TIF in a minute, but we're talking about the 3.2 is really for housing, and any commercial endeavors we have there are to service that community. The diesel plant is something else that could be served really in a number of ways, whether it's as a convention center or as a museum, and that brings forth the culture and perhaps even some income generation, right? But there are separate things that we're not talking about melding the two commercial properties and both for income generation necessarily. Is that right? All right, so that's...
The only thing I would add is you synthesize it is food.
There's definitely in these two groups an emphasis and need and recognition that the food isn't just for enjoyment, it's a necessity.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important point to make in the notes, Katie. I see Katie's taking our notes. What's wrong with Fausto's? It's not, I think it's not close enough. Sorry, Jimmy. All right, let's go. We only have a couple more minutes, so let's not tally. Let's go to the first question. And I'm going to ask this group to go first on this one, which was the third question, sorry, which is, if the 3.2 site and diesel plant did increase revenue for the TIF, what types of community programs or assets are most needed? So I think our group had an answer that surprised me a little bit.
None.
Based on right. Did you hear that? None. Brian, can you expand? None.
We don't see this as being the driver for this development. We think it's going to be difficult enough to fund as it is.
Is your mic on?
No.
Okay, so he's basically, okay.
We think it'll be difficult enough to fund as it is. We think there will be some income stream that will come through. If we were able to do home equity housing, there will of course come equity through the housing itself and through increased value. But in terms of some sort of income stream like a rental, there's no point even talking about it. It should be none. It shouldn't divert our attention.
Mark, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but can you just repeat what you said to us about the sort of summing up the revenue that would come from taxes, the point that you were making first quietly and then to the whole group?
So, first you have to understand TIF, and TIF is the increased valuation of the assessed value that comes through the improvements that you make within the CRA. So in '98, they established a base value for all the parcels that fall within the CRA, and it was X. And all of the taxable value and the associated ad valorem taxes that come along with that, from that year and before, go to the general fund. All the growth in the valuation from that year forward go to the benefit of the CRA. And naturally, since there's been the most exponential growth in the community from '98, you've gone from maybe 4 times to 5 times what the initial value was. That is the value to the CRA, is is putting in place assets that have increased valuation in which it increases the tax amounts that go to them from both the city and the county moving forward. If you put a restaurant down there using a developer's money, who gets the rents from that? Does it go to the TIF? Does it go to the CRA? Or does it go to the one who put the funding out there to put that asset in place? It necessarily doesn't flow right back to the CRA. And it's just a little difficult for some to get their head around. There will be some increment that will come back
From
to
the
CRA.
taxes, I thought you were going to make the point about the taxes. There will be increment that comes
There will be
back.
increment that will come back, and that's how the CRA will continue to be able to look forward to other improvements which would increase the value of that community.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's go to this group, let's go to that group to answer number one. So basically, no, they're saying don't pursue, this is not going to be useful in pursuit and will actually add a burden to the property, to the deal for a developer. Yes?
No, that's it. So for number 3, essentially what we said was a lot of what we're looking to do is we're not looking to duplicate amenities. We don't really necessarily want to add too much, but what would happen is we could remodel homes to increase property values, and we could use that with the TIF money. That's really all we had.
I'll let Daniel speak.
Yeah, so Liz told us this very charming story about how there's this underserved community in Atlanta who is updating and helping each other remodel their homes, ergo raising property values and maybe even landing some more money into the TIF bank. So it kind of seems to make sense that if you're going to, we will get money from whatever we put there, period. And that money should go directly back into people's houses to then raise their taxable values and put more money into the TIF and just have it be a cyclical.
So you're just saying that however the money comes, it should be put back into the houses themselves.
So, since I'm so old, I can't remember anything, but Sunday night on 60 Minutes, if you have not watched it, if you put in your little Google, it's called purposebuiltcommunities.org, PBC. It's in South Atlanta, and actually one of the whole components of the story was about the health of the community, and it's focused on the Carver Market that they built, which was the grocery store. So if you did not see it on 60 Minutes, please take 11 or 12 minutes and watch it. I just said to Patty, I had tears streaming down my face because it was exactly what we're talking about today. It's
Okay.
already being done. It talks about the money like Dina did. I urge you to watch
Okay.
it. 60
That's
minutes.
something we should be doing when we're thinking about getting more information. Okay, that's good.
What's the title of it again?
We'll send it out. When we send the notes out, we'll send all of this information, the PowerPoints, and the suggestions from today. Let's go to this last group before we end. A quick summation. Come on back, my friends, of question number 3.
So I think I was a bad facilitator, and we didn't really cover this one so much.
Okay.
But we talked about a lot of other stuff that's recorded.
Hi.
And I mean, we did talk a little bit about the business opportunity and the lack of subsidy from, maybe that's more in the CRA's area of work and not in the cities, but I'm sorry. We had talked about some other good stuff, though.
Is there any point you want to share that would be interesting for us to know?
Just to address the TIF a little bit, I've worked with several TIFs in Illinois, and it may not be the exact same thing we got here, but Mark, I think the amount of increment that we're going to see, no matter who this is or what it is going to be large for that parcel. And then what are we going to do with that money, and how are we going to implement it back into the district? It should be a good thing. I feel like maybe it's been a little more than what you stated.
The system is designed so that it will absolutely find its way back to the CRA. And then once it's in the CRA's coffers, it's going to have to follow the same process that we currently use in determining what projects or programs qualify for the appropriate use of CRA money. And that's in your CRA plan.
So the bottom line is we do generate revenue,
You will
and the question
generate
is, what do you
revenue,
do
but
with
At
it?
the end of the day, you will not know until you decide what you're putting in place.
Okay.
and what
All
income
right.
it produces.
Well, there's more that I know we could say, but what we're going to do is stop. Are you pointing it?
Yeah, Daniel had something.
Daniel, did you want to say one last thing?
Yeah, we had one last thing on where the TIF money could go is job training for tourism specific related activities. We all know that tourism is the power economy here. So if we had a job training site, which I don't think that the gym or the annex building is going to be used for job training specifically for tourism, we could do something like that at
Okay.
the convention space or something similar.
Okay.
Thank you.
So once we get the money, there's a lot of potential thinking about what we could do with it. Let's stop there and say that we have gotten some threads of clarity from this discussion and then also disparity between ideas, which is fine. It just gives us something to begin working on and further following up upon as we start to develop the RFP for this. And so that's very useful discourse as an initial discussion. I'm going to ask that we get the notes from all three groups, and so we can type them up and get more detail. We may come back to certain group members and ask for more clarification if need be. And then I would just like to end by asking anybody if they would like to make a few comments about today, about how you feel about the future of this project. I think it brought us some new ideas, both from the panelists and from this discussion. Does anybody want to speak to this? Oh, Warren, we have a BVRAC member here who we would love to hear from you.
Thank you. I have been involved with affordable housing since my restaurant started probably almost 30 years ago. And this is a good place we are at this time to see that something is moving on that property. And as I promised my dear wife that the day that they drive the first shovel in the ground, I will resign from all boards. I'm done.
So we need to buy ourselves more time. Another reason to hold off. Okay, thank you, Warren. Anybody else? Brian, okay.
I think I've learned a lot today. I think finding out that shared equity, home equity is a possibility.
Turn your mic
Brian,
on.
your microphone's not on.
Turn your mic on. Your mic's not on.
It's a huge step forward.
Home ownership, the fact that we've realized how important.
I'm very excited by where this takes us to. I'd like us to stop asking the question about what we want and start telling people this is a summary of where we've got to and drive forward rather than people letting it go round and round in circles.
Okay, that's good advice on process. Let's hear from we have a few brave commissioners left in the room. I think we've got Commissioner Wheatley, we've got the mayor. Who else have we got? That's Mary Lou Hoover. Why don't we start with Miss Mary Lou? We're so happy to see you in person again. Just some final thoughts if you have anything.
I wouldn't need that, wouldn't I? I would just like to say that, as Brian just said, I think everybody in our group anyway got this feeling like, whoa, eureka today. Instead of, I think we now have decided, at least here, and I think maybe it's starting to spread everywhere, that we just need, now, we know what we want, we're going forward, we need to find out just a little bit more information, and then we just don't keep going backwards, we keep going forwards.
And with that, I think you mean the home ownership piece. Yes. Let's go to Commissioner Weekly. Just remember to turn it on. Final thoughts, Commissioner?
I just want to see this get done as quickly as possible. I don't want to be sitting here another year or another 2 years having these same discussions. This 3.2 has been talked about so much. I'm surprised that no one has come across and said, I'm taking it back, because we haven't really been doing anything with it.
Thank you.
I gathered a lot of good positive information today from this today.
Good.
And we need to make sure that we not only move forward, but move forward quickly, because there's a lot of people in this community that need this housing, and we have to get it done for that purpose. Just look at the number of people since the pandemic that has left left the city of Key West. Look at the jobs that people are looking for in every aspect of the industry, not just tourism, but in every aspect of the economy. And so this is such an important issue that we get this completed as quickly as possible. And I would like to see us, and I guess, did Steve leave? Yeah, I would like to see us move forward in discussions with the Navy about how
The
to
tower?
move the tower. as quickly as
So the tower, home ownership, let's not wait. Let's not keep discussing. Let's move forward in the coming months.
Jimmy?
These are the culminating messages. Let's end with the mayor. if
No,
we-
I don't want to talk to her. I just want to say something. Could you and the mayor write the RFP this week? No, really, and put it out.
No, we can't. We cannot.
We're
we-
not going to write it this week.
We
We're-
need additional
yeah.
information. I think today taught us exactly how much we don't know. And today, though, for the first time in 17 years, we have gotten concrete information on this is the type of funding that is out there to do this, if you choose to do this. If you choose this, this is the type of funding that's out there. And I think we came to the realization today that we're going to have to subsidize if we want anything out there, which I think has paralyzed us for 17 years. The conversation today, and Ed, I agree with you on this point, is the fact that when we started talking about home ownership and our young families staying in Key West and raising families, it brings us back to our point, whether we vocalize it or not, but we are fragmenting as a community. We are becoming a haven for second, third, fourth, and fifth homes. And I think it scares us all. One of the conversations that we had with what can we put down there on this 3.2 acres, I said what we need is porches on sidewalks so that people walk along and talk to each other and not are behind a 6-foot wall. But we become a community and we enhance that ability to become a community because we become stronger in every aspect. So thank you to everyone who participated today. It was a worthwhile exercise. Thank you for everybody who had the courage to have comments because it takes a village. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. We will move forward. We will update you with a timeline on the RFP as well. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Since we first talked about this, been talking about that, an expansion of that scope. And that was never in there, and it wasn't even discussed until our last meeting when